Now, the NATO Secretary-General says the alliance doesn't consider Russia to be its enemy, but is also not ready to compromise on principal issues. Anders Rasmussen is in Moscow to seek greater assistance from Moscow for the military campaign in Afghanistan. And let's go live now to RT's Sarah Firth, who's following the visit. Hello there, Sarah. So, how will Russia-NATO relations look in the coming year?
Well, yeah, it was a very positive speech laid out by the General Secretary, Rasmussen, and what he was saying it was very forward-looking at what relations could look like in the future. He was saying in 2020 what his ideas and ideals would be for that. And we can see a bit of what he said now.
By 2020, cooperation between NATO and Russia on missile defense will have advanced to the point where we are able to link our systems to create a genuine missile shield in the Euro-Atlantic area, which will not only protect us all against proliferation, but bind us together politically as well.
Now, what he was saying was that he really felt the blueprints for this were already in place, but there's a lot of work to be done. And he said that his trip here over the last couple of days has really been working towards what he himself laid out on his very first day in his role as Secretary-General for NATO, which is transforming Russia-NATO relations into a true strategic partnership. Now, what he said was, to be able to do this, we really need to stop fighting the ghosts of the past. We've got to focus on the real threats that are facing both Russia and NATO today, and these are common threats, and that we've got nothing to fear. Russia has nothing to fear from NATO in this day and age.
Real trust and NATO will never attack Russia. Never. And we don't think Russia will attack us. We have stopped worrying about this, and Russia should stop worrying about us as well.
So, as we said, we've heard there about some of his ideas that he was laying out, and other issues that he touched on was the fact that Afghanistan's really a very common threat for both Russia and NATO. He was talking about the ways that NATO's come over here to try and gain support for this war. So they've asked for help from helicopters or for training the Afghan troops and forces, and that was one of the points that he touched on. They also talked about the thorny issue of the NATO expansion, so the inclusion of Georgia and Ukraine, the proposed inclusion. He said obviously certain criteria would need to be met before this would happen, but that it's really not something that Russia should consider a threat. It's not something to worry about, and that what needs to be done now. He was speaking to the people here who were students. They were the future leaders, so they really need to focus on building these relationships, on strengthening these ties, and really looking forward to the future.
All right, Sarah, many thanks indeed. Sarah Firth there.
You want Georgia inside NATO and Ukraine. If this summer that had been the situation, you might have had to go to war over the Georgia situation. Would you have been prepared to do that?
Well, I'm not going to deal with hypotheticals,
well,
but I have
really
but I have been a very strong proponent of the view that NATO is a military alliance. Mm-hmm. It's not a talk shop, and Article 5 means what it says. So there is a commitment to go to the assistance of our allies if they are challenged.
That was pretty clear, but let me get it even more clearly. Therefore, if and when Georgia does come into the NATO alliance, you stand by Article 5. An attack on any member is an attack on all.
We would stand by our commitments.
Is it genocide or is it not? How many civilians must die before we describe it as genocide?
Russian journalists also became hostages in the conflict zone. Some of them were wounded, at least 2 were killed, but the number is likely to increase. One of RT's own crews got stuck in the middle of the fighting.
It was the worst nightmare when the Georgian tanks moved into the city. Tsin Valley was completely ruined. The tanks fired at everyone they saw. The fighting started and there was shooting quite close to us and shells exploded all around. We thought we were going to die.
Hours before the Georgian attack, President Saakashvili was calling for peace and dialogue of all sides in the conflict. He particularly underlined Tbilisi's readiness. And after, the Georgian military shelled the capital of the breakaway region, Tsinvali, with salvo fire.
In the evening, Saakashvili made a TV address saying, "Ossetians, I love you, sleep well." We thought he had come to his senses finally, but then when we found 75% of my relatives are Georgians, I feel very anxious. There is a former classmate of mine in the village of Achia. He's very sick, and I'm extremely worried about him. Come in.
People fled the city in panic. Most of them headed to Russia's Republic of North Ossetia. Up to 30,000 people crossed the Russian border. Leaving everything behind, they were desperate to know the fate of their relatives left in Tsinvali.
For 4 days, kids had been sitting on the floor in the basement without water. We managed to escape so we could take them back to Vladikavkaz. Later we got caught under fire but managed to survive. My mother, all my brothers and other relatives remained back in Tsinvali. I drove the children here and now I'm going back.
Those who couldn't escape hid in the basements, calling for help. Many of them buried under the rubble of their own houses.
We are from Tsinvali. It was horrible. My house was burned down. My child is crying all the time. They were bombing us from planes and used multi-rocket launch systems. It was intolerable. We went down to the basement, but when they found out where we were, they flooded the water. The children were crying. They were cold. They started bombing us while we were trying to find another shelter. One little boy died.
Paisia Sitnik was just one out of many buried under the debris in Tsinvali. Her voice calling for help was among the first to break through.
The planes are bombing us. Let somebody come and help us. Where are the peacekeepers? I'm sitting here together with other people. My son has been killed. Why nobody comes to save us? We've got people sitting here.
She managed to call her friends in Vladikavkaz. With no food and no water, holding her dead son in her arms, Paisia spent many hours in the basement before she managed to escape.
People must have seen the building on fire and started shouting if anybody was under there. They made several attempts to take us all out.
Her 20-year-old son had just graduated from medical college this summer. He wanted to go to Moscow, but now will never have the chance. Like Paisia, many families in Tsinvali are burying their children together with their dreams.
My son's body remained under the rubble. I came back to him in the morning. We made a pit not far from there and put him on a piece of a roof that had fallen down. We couldn't bury him anywhere.
As Paisia tells us her story on the phone, she says she lives in the south of Tsinvali and quickly corrects herself. Used to live, as the city where she had spent all her life no longer exists.